The Bucs appear to have won the Tom Brady sweepstakes, and Brady is expected to announce that he will be the next quarterback for Tampa Bay very soon. On that note, we bring in his former teammate, our friend, the one and only Damien Woody. Damien, so good to have you with us.
How you guys doing?
Going on,
We're
big
good.
guy.
We're hanging
What's up,
in.
man?
Damien,
All right.
before we get to our debate here, since we haven't heard from you, wanted to ask you this. What was your initial reaction to all of this? Brady leaving New England and then choosing Tampa Bay?
Well, I've been saying for months that I thought Tom Brady was leaving New England. I thought there was a variety of factors, his family and TB12, and I just felt like maybe a lack of respect from the organization as far as getting them the weapons that he needed to play at the level that he wants to play at. So it wasn't really a surprise to me, but I will say that you never know until it finally happens, until it came out the horse's mouth, and when it did, I'm like, okay, it's on now.
All right. Thank you, Damien. Appreciate the perspective on that. But I want to get to the debate here. Stephen A., talk to me about this. Those 6 rings up there in Foxborough. Who is more responsible at the end of the day? That's going to be the question all season long as those two have decided to separate. Is it Brady or is it Belichick?
Well, listen, I'm one of those guys that thinks it's Brady. Now, I understand. I know what I just said about the multitude of responsibilities that Bill Belichick has had. But please don't get me wrong, but I'm thinking at the actual Super Bowl games that have taken place. I'm thinking about when you beat the Eagles. I'm thinking about when you beat the Carolina Panthers with Jake Delhomme. I'm thinking about, when you beat Seattle, even though you should have lost that game. I'm thinking about, when you came back against Atlanta. There are a multitude of situations where New England's defense, although always very good those seasons they won Super Bowls, there were a lot of times where Brady came to the rescue. It wasn't just in terms of his offensive performance. It was in terms of ball control, not making mistakes, not allowing you to beat yourself, et cetera, not going out there and making the kind of typical mistakes that we've seen other quarterbacks make. And when you look at it from that perspective, I just view it from the standpoint that Brady is the GOAT for a reason in a lot of people's eyes, because when it was called upon for him to show up and deliver the goods, that's exactly what he ended up doing. Bill Belichick is obviously exceptional and an exceptional overseer as well as a defensive mind, but there were times over the years in their Super Bowls where they were a top 5 defense. They were, 13th in yards allowed, 21st in yards allowed, 22nd in yards allowed, things of that nature. And I recall those things factoring into the equation when they were in jeopardy of losing Super Bowls before Tom Brady came to the rescue. So that's how I view it, and that's why I give Tom Brady the nod in terms of being more responsible for
Of course, they both are hugely.
Victories.
They're both hugely responsible for the 6 Super Bowl wins. Obviously, that's why it's an interesting question. But the answer is clearly Bill Belichick is more responsible. First of all, Damien, what you said, you know better than anyone. You got to leave New England to get paid. And so Brady eventually left. But baseball, as I've always said, is about the GM. Basketball is about the players. Football is about the coach. Of course, all 3 are about everybody, all 3. But if you had to say who's most responsible for success in those sports, that's how it goes. And we're talking about football, and that's the coach. But not only that, he's also the GM. So he acquires the players that he wants, and then he puts them in the best position to win. He's doing it all. Belichick is the one most responsible. Those Super Bowls that you mentioned, Stephen A., almost every one of them was decided by a field goal. So as Dan Orlovsky said about Teddy Bridgewater, and he's right, he keeps you in the games, he keeps you competitive, and Brady does the same thing. But what structure is in place that those games come down to the wire? Not just the quarterback, not just the defense. It's all those things combined. The players you acquire and how you coach them up. In any championship run like the one the Patriots have had, the best player, the quarterback in this case, has to be an extension of the coach on the field. Tim Duncan for Greg Popovich, Bill Russell for Red Auerbach, Derek Jeter for Joe Torre. I get that, and Tom Brady for Bill Belichick. It's a good relationship that way. But when you have to identify who is most responsible, most is the coach, who's also the GM, Bill Belichick.
Yeah, listen, I think we're splitting hairs here because we're talking about two of the greatest at their respective quote unquote positions ever in Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. But I'm gonna give a slight edge to Bill Belichick, and here's why. Okay, as great as we talk about Tom Brady, you have to remember Tom Brady didn't just land into the National Football League and became who he is today. He had to be developed. The Patriot way, the culture had to be developed. Okay, Bill Belichick is the guy. He is the GM. He is the one voice. He's the one that instilled the culture, put the roster together. He's the one that's been at the forefront of a lot of trends that we've seen in those 20 years. Whether it's two tight ends with Gronk and Hernandez, whether it was the prolific offense that we saw with Tom Brady and Randy Moss, going to ground and pound against the Kansas City Chiefs to get themselves to the Super Bowl, shutting out the Los Angeles Rams in the Super Bowl. There's a lot of things that goes into the success that the Patriots have had in 20 years. And a big reason why is because of Bill Belichick and his genius as being the head coach, away and beyond any other coach in the National Football League.
Well, see, the thing about it is that it's hard to disagree with that, Damian. I'll give you credit for that. But I think the thing for me is that what were we saying about Bill Belichick before Tom Brady came along? Things were growing in Cleveland before he was let go there. He went back. He was a defensive coordinator in New York, ultimately landed in New England after, the whole Bill Parcells thing went awry there in New York, and he didn't end up staying and being the successor to Bill Parcells with the New York Jets. But then he arrives in New England. He has Drew Bledsoe. What kind of success were they having at that particular moment in time? Tom Brady comes in there, and let's remember, a multitude of teams passed on Tom Brady for 5 rounds. 5 rounds. So he landed in their lap and what have you. And if I remember correctly, they thought so much of Tom Brady that they went out, and I think I'm trying to remember whether it was Damon Heward or so. I forgot who it was, but they signed somebody to $1 million for 1 year to be Drew Bledsoe's backup, and then all of a sudden Tom Brady played slightly better than him, and it went from there. All I'm trying to say is that you could say luck had something to do with it. I guess Bill Belichick deserves credit for that, but in the end, what is Tom Brady saying? Look at what I've done. If we really want to get down to brass tacks, Tom Brady, if there was any friction between him and Bill Belichick, you know why. It's because Tom Brady is saying, look what I've done, and look what I've done for you. And if you're Bill Belichick, you're like, hell no, you didn't. I did this. And that's why you had no problems sitting there and telling Robert Kraft or anybody else, I don't mind Tom Brady leaving. Yeah. He said all the right things in his statements. He wrote the right things. It sounded very glowing, very beautiful. I don't doubt that he meant it. But we haven't seen Bill Belichick in front of the cameras saying such a thing about losing Tom Brady. Usually somebody of this magnitude, you're actually having a press conference to say goodbye.
There's no assembled media.
Anything like that. Haven't heard about anything like that.
There's no assembled media right now because these are strange times.
Yeah, that's true.
But let me say
this.
This is the way I would put it to sum up what we're seeing here. And the Brady-Belichick marriage for 20 years, the most fruitful in the history of football. And you could argue sports, given the nature of football, how unlikely it is to go to 9 Super Bowls and win 6 in a 2-decade span. I'll say this. Belichick was going to have a lot of success, period, in that time with New England. You could swap Brady out with an average quarterback. Belichick would have still usually had a winning record, usually gone to the playoffs. I'll bet you he would have won a couple Super Bowls. If you swap Brady out with a lesser quarterback but a good one, I'll bet you Belichick goes to 4 or 5 Super Bowls, wins a couple. Now, the fact is he had Tom Brady, so they went to 9 and won 6. But Belichick was going to have a lot of success, period.
Yep. Damian, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you. And Stephen A. mentioned that Brady, obviously a late draft pick. He was actually pick number 199, and that's what's implored him to recently start the 199 productions. We have much more to come here on First Take. When we come back, Marcus Spears, Swagoo, will join us. How does Brady going to the Bucs impact the NFL in its entirety? We'll dive into that. Stay right here. It's First Take.